Russia spent years building a shield that's supposed to stop drones from killing its tanks. On its first confirmed combat test, it never fired at all. At the same time, hundreds of kilometers away, two warehouses were burning so large that satellites could see the smoke from orbit. Today's video covers two stories that landed within days of each other. One on the battlefield, one nowhere near it, and why both point to the same underlying problem for Moscow. Welcome back. Let's start with the tank. For years, Russia has promised a real answer to the FPV drones that have become the single most consistent killer of its armor. The Arena M Active Protection System, a radar-guided shield meant to detect an incoming threat and shoot it down with fragmentation charges before impact. In January, Russia's Defense Ministry confirmed a new software update specifically built to target FPV drones, not just the anti-tank missiles the system was originally designed for. Frontline units began receiving upgraded T-72B3A and T-90M tanks. State media presented it as the breakthrough that would finally let Russian armor move again after 2 years of drones making any large tank advance close to suicidal. The system itself isn't new. Early versions were live fire tested back in 2021, years before this war reached its current intensity. But the anti-drone mode specifically was the part being sold as the genuine innovation, the missing piece that would finally let mechanized offensives return. Then came the test. Footage released by the Ukrainian National Guard's Omega Special Forces unit shows a Russian T-72B3A, part of a 10-tank column near the village of Mayak in Donetsk Oblast, taking a direct FPV hit to the rear. Arena M never engaged, no interceptor fired, no response at all. A Russian military analyst had actually predicted exactly this failure back in November, arguing that the system's radar struggles to distinguish small plastic and composite drones from background clutter at close range. Watching the prediction confirmed on camera in a real battle is a different thing entirely from reading it as a theoretical concern months earlier. This wasn't an isolated tank either. Ukraine's general staff reported roughly 28 destroyed Russian tanks and armored vehicles on July 23rd alone, a notably high number for a period when drone coverage has pushed most large, mechanized advances toward zero. Ukrainian units, including the drone regiment Phoenix, reported destroying multiple additional tanks fitted with Arena M in the same engagement, along with air defense systems, multiple rocket launchers, and infantry. Russian sources had framed this specific push as an attempt to exploit a moment of apparent confusion in Ukraine's own command structure, following the leadership change earlier that same week. Instead, by most accounts of the engagement, the bulk of the attacking force never even reached the front line it was trying to break through. There's a specific irony we're sitting with here. This wasn't a rushed, improvised assault by poorly trained conscripts. It was framed by Russia's own side as the debut of its most advanced available armor technology, timed deliberately around what Moscow assumed would be a moment of Ukrainian disarray. Instead, the very week meant to showcase Russian innovation became the week that innovation failed on camera, in front of exactly the audience Russia was trying to reassure. Now to the second story, because it's happening on a completely different kind of front. In Leningrad Oblast, drone swarms hit two massive Wildberries warehouses in St. Petersburg, a combined 260,000 square meters between them, satellite imagery showing both fires and the resulting smoke plumes clearly visible from orbit. That came one day after a similar strike hit a warehouse in Crimea, and around the same time, drones hit a defense plant in Kirov region that manufactures interceptor missiles for the Tor M2 air defense system, along with several cruise missile variants. An attack Russian authorities said killed 6 workers and injured more than 24 others. Wildberries and its main rival together account for something like 8.5% of Russian GDP in goods and services moved, employing roughly 4 million people. That's not a niche target, and there's a specific ownership claim worth flagging clearly because it's serious and I can't independently confirm it. Reports circulating around this story claim that a majority stake in the company managing Wildberries' warehouse. Real estate is held through a foundation linked to Sergei Roldygin, the cellist long described as one of Vladimir Putin's closest personal friends, and according to past leaked financial documents, someone associated with managing wealth on behalf of people close to the Kremlin. If that ownership structure is accurate, it would mean this specific campaign isn't just hitting a random logistics company. It's hitting assets tied to Putin's own inner circle That's a claim worth taking seriously, but it's also one that deserves real scrutiny rather than being repeated as settled fact. And it's worth remembering that plenty of dramatic ownership claims about Russian companies have turned out to be simplified or exaggerated once independent investigators actually dug into the paperwork. What's easier to confirm is the mechanism of the damage itself and why these warehouses burn as violently as they do. Typical fulfillment centers are built almost entirely from flammable material: cardboard, wood pallets, plastic packaging, textiles, thousands of pressurized aerosol cans that rupture and ignite their own propellant, lithium batteries from e-bikes and power tools that burn at extreme temperatures, even bottled alcohol that can explode once a fire crosses a certain threshold. A drone doesn't need much payload to start a fire in a building built like that. It just needs to get through, and Russian air defense increasingly can't stop that from happening. In effect, the warehouse's own contents do most of the actual work once the first spark takes hold, which is exactly why a relatively small drone can produce a fire large enough for satellites in orbit to photograph the smoke plume from hundreds of kilometers up. The economic aftershocks are already visible. Sellers say Wildberries has refused to let them retrieve remaining stock from undamaged warehouses, leaving thousands of small businesses with inventory they can neither sell nor recover. Russian military bloggers themselves have reported that supply deliveries to Frontline units are increasingly failing to arrive, since much of the logistics network moving both civilian goods and dual-use military equipment ran through exactly this kind of centralized infrastructure. The same volunteers and soldiers who used to order gear straight to the front through that marketplace now have nowhere left to order it from. So here's where the two stories connect. Both expose the same pattern: systems built for a different kind of war, concentrated in ways that looked efficient right up until they became single points of failure. Arena M was engineered against anti-tank missiles, not swarms of cheap FPV drones, and Russia kept deploying it anyway because the alternative was fielding tanks with no protection at all. Wildberries centralized Russia's entire e-commerce logistics into a handful of enormous warehouses, because that's what made the business efficient in peacetime, and nobody redesigned that model once drones capable of reaching deep into Russian territory became a daily reality. Both were built for assumptions that no longer hold, and both are now being tested by an enemy that specifically studies where those old assumptions still linger. The tank that was supposed to shoot down the drone never fired a shot. The warehouses that were supposed to be too big to meaningfully damage are visible from space, still smoking. And somewhere between a battlefield in Donetsk and a burning warehouse in St. Petersburg, the same lesson keeps repeating. Bigger and more centralized isn't the same thing as safe.